She slammed the brakes so hard the dust came up like a curtain between us. An oversized SUV stopped right at the edge of my fence line, tires half off the gravel road. The driver's door flung open before the engine even died, and out stepped the woman I'd heard stories about but never met in person. Blonde bob, expensive sunglasses, marching like she owned the entire mountain. "You're trespassing on HOA property," she screeched, waving a rolled-up paper like it was a royal decree. I didn't say a word at first. I just stood there next to my surveyor's tripod, sun in my eyes, one boot sunk into the dirt I'd been measuring all week. She stormed closer, stepping right through a posted sign that read private property. I finally looked up, pointed to the boundary marker in the ground and said, calmly as I could, "Ma'am, this land's mine. The county map says so. And I would know. I'm the one who drew it." She blinked, took a half step back, then looked again like she hadn't heard me right. That's when I realized what kind of war this was about to become. Because I hadn't just stepped on HOA turf. I'd stepped on the queen bee's ego. 3 weeks earlier, I had wrapped up a reassessment of my late uncle's land parcel after discovering a decades-old discrepancy in the deed. I inherited the ranch 2 years back, and though it spanned about 40 acres on paper, the original boundary lines had been vaguely drawn by a surveyor who probably used a compass, whiskey, and wishful thinking. I submitted an official request with the county land department to resurvey the property using modern GPS equipment. The result was minor, a 10-foot shift in one segment of the southern boundary. But that shift just happened to place a little wedge of gravel road and a decorative fence line inside my legal land. And it just happened that this new section bordered a recently built neighborhood managed by an HOA with a reputation for overreach. I didn't think anything of it. I installed a simple post and rail marker with signage and assumed that was the end of it. Then came the SUV. And the woman inside it. I later found out her name was Karen Prescott, president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association, founder, self-appointed enforcer, and part-time destroyer of peaceful weekends. She wasn't on the original county development plans. She moved in 6 months ago after her husband sold a law office in Denver and retired early. From what I gathered, Karen took to her new title the way a cat takes to a sunbeam, entirely convinced it was made just for her. The day she pulled up, I was surveying my own fence line for possible new piping routes for my irrigation system. She got out and began filming immediately, claiming I was disturbing native vegetation and violating HOA landscaping code. I told her plainly that not only was this private ranchland, but that I had permits for every activity I was conducting. That just set her off even more. She pointed to a young maple tree growing at the corner of the disputed wedge and said, "That tree belongs to the HOA. You can't just dig around it." I raised a brow and replied, "That tree is 7 feet into my property. I planted it 2 years ago." She squinted like I'd said something obscene, then huffed and walked back to her car while still recording. I didn't hear anything for 2 days. Then I got a call from the county sheriff's office. An anonymous complaint had been filed alleging I was illegally grading HOA land and refusing to leave when asked. The deputy on the phone knew me personally, so he was laughing halfway through. "Don't worry," he said. "We're not coming out for that nonsense unless she makes it a felony." Still, the situation had gone from annoying to ridiculous. I knew I couldn't take her at face value anymore. I started digging deeper into the HOA documentation. I pulled up the plat maps and compared them to my own updated versions. What I saw made me sit back in my chair and exhale slowly. The version Karen submitted in her complaint to the county was a doctored copy of the original subdivision plan. She had removed certain easement labels and extended the greenbelt boundary right over into my fence line. Not only that, but the file's metadata showed it was altered using a software suite most people wouldn't touch unless they were trying to look official. That was strike one. I printed everything. My survey report, the original deed, the approved parcel adjustment, and both map versions. I kept them in a folder labeled HOA Circus. I also printed a copy of my county ID and kept it in my shirt pocket the next time I stepped outside. Because if Karen wanted a show, I was ready to give her the full matinee. 3 mornings later, I spotted a group of HOA board members standing near my corner fence line. Karen was with them, holding up a clipboard and gesturing toward my property like she was narrating a crime scene. I walked up slowly, tipped my hat, and asked what they were doing. Karen barely looked at me. One of the men, an older guy with an awkward smile, stepped forward and said they were performing an informal visual assessment of shared perimeter zones. I told him that was a fancy way to say trespassing and asked them all politely to return to their own subdivision. Karen scoffed. "You're going to regret being so hostile," she said. "This isn't your land no matter what you think you drew. We're submitting formal notice tomorrow." I just nodded and smiled. "Great. I'll see you at the meeting," I said. She didn't know it yet, but that county HOA complaint review she was racing to submit? I was already scheduled to attend. As the senior land surveyor assigned to the Western District, I had every right to review her plat under official duty. She wasn't just picking a fight with a neighbor. She was challenging the man in charge of measuring the battlefield. That night I walked my property line under the moonlight, something I hadn't done in a while. The stars were out, the crickets loud, and the cattle chewing away without a care in the world. But even with the peace around me, I couldn't shake the tension building in my gut. Karen was no ordinary meddler. She had the drive of someone who thought paperwork made her powerful, the kind who turned rules into weapons and neighbors into targets. I'd seen it before. People like her thought they could bend land, law, and logic to their will just because no one ever stood up to them. Well, she had finally met someone who knew exactly where the lines were drawn. I had spent 20 years measuring other people's land. Now it was time to protect my own. The next morning brought a fresh breeze, the kind that made the leaves dance on their own and the cattle raise their heads for no reason but curiosity. I was back at the boundary line, double-checking post spacing for the water line extension I'd been planning for months. I kept my documents close in a waterproof folder, more out of habit than anything else. In my experience, it wasn't the land that lied. It was the people who didn't understand it. The land always told the truth, and my measurements never needed an opinion to back them up. As I tightened the last corner wire, and stepped back to make sure the line was straight, I heard the unmistakable sound of golf carts humming down the gravel lane. I turned slowly, already knowing who it was before I saw her. Karen led the procession, one hand raised in dramatic protest like she was leading a march through Washington. 3 HOA board members followed, each riding a separate cart like they were too important to carpool. Behind them trailed a man in khakis and a clipboard who looked like he regretted waking up that morning. As they approached, Karen put on the face I'd come to associate with daytime courtroom television, half smile, half sneer, and all delusion. She didn't say hello. She went straight to declarations. "This is a cease and desist inspection," she said, waving a folder that looked suspiciously like a printed Wikipedia article. "We are within our rights to enforce our neighborhood covenant. You are clearly in violation of Code 7A, subsection 3. Unauthorized land disturbance adjacent to shared greenbelt." I leaned one elbow on the fence post and gave her the kind of look I normally reserve for broken tape measures. "This is my land," I said. "You're standing on it. And if your clipboard guy takes one step closer, I'm going to assume he's trying to sell me termite insurance." The man in khakis froze mid-step. One of the board members, a woman named Susan I recognized from church picnics, opened her mouth, probably to de-escalate, but Karen cut her off. "We have rights," she snapped. "And we're giving you formal notice. This will be reviewed at our emergency board meeting tonight. You are required to attend." I raised a brow and asked, "You're summoning me to a neighborhood meeting for a place I don't live in?" Karen smirked like she'd caught me in a legal loophole. "You may not be a resident," she said, "but you are a violator." I let them roll away without another word, dust kicking up in their wake, and I returned to the ranch house. I cleaned up, changed into a cleaner flannel, grabbed the county map printouts, the boundary report, and a copy of the plat map she had submitted in her complaint. I also added one extra sheet to the stack. My county-issued ID and badge, clearly showing my title as Senior Surveyor of Land Management, Western District. If she wanted a performance, I'd give her one. That evening, I arrived at the HOA clubhouse precisely 5 minutes late. Not on accident. I knew Karen needed the spotlight, and I was happy to let her have her opening act. I walked into a room full of folding chairs, potted plants that looked like they were held hostage, and about 20 residents pretending to care. Karen stood at the front near a projector screen with a slideshow titled, "Encroachment, a Threat to Our Community." She paused mid-sentence when I entered, clearly not expecting me to show up in boots and a county field jacket. "Ah, Mr. Carter," she said loudly. "Thank you for finally joining us." I nodded and took a seat in the back, slowly unpacking my folder on the folding table beside me. Karen clicked to the next slide, a blurry photo of my truck parked near the fence line, clearly taken from a neighbor's upstairs window. "As you can see, this individual has repeatedly parked and performed unauthorized construction activities on what is designated as protected greenbelt." I raised my hand. She ignored it. "In addition," she continued, "we have received multiple reports that he has installed fencing in violation of Aesthetic Code 5, failed to submit landscaping proposals, and has disturbed native flora without clearance from the neighborhood's environmental review chair." I raised my hand again, then stood without being acknowledged. "My name is Ben Carter," I said, voice steady, but louder now, "and I am the senior land surveyor for this entire district, including Whispering Pines, including the land you're accusing me of stealing." The room got quiet real fast. Karen folded her arms, but her smile cracked. I opened the folder and began passing copies to the board members and nearby residents. "This is a legally certified map of my ranch parcel, including the most recent boundary adjustment filed and approved by the county 3 months ago. The section in question, which your president here is calling a shared greenbelt, has been legally part of my land since long before this subdivision existed." I placed the altered map Karen had submitted on the projector table. "This is the plat map your president submitted to the county during her complaint. This version has been modified. Key easements have been erased. The digital file metadata shows it was edited on her personal computer 2 weeks ago." "That's tampering." One of the board members, a balding man with horn-rimmed glasses, leaned in. Is that illegal?" I didn't answer. I just let the question hang while I passed around the next set of documents, a signed letter from the county clerk verifying the authenticity of my survey. Then I placed my badge down in front of Karen. "You filed a complaint against a county official using false documentation. That's not just a mistake. That's misconduct." Karen's jaw clenched. "You're trying to intimidate us. This is a conflict of interest. You can't just survey your own land and declare it yours." I calmly nodded. "That's why I didn't. I assigned it to one of my colleagues, who surveyed it without knowing it was mine. I reviewed the final submission only after the data came in. Everything was legal. Everything was clean." The slideshow behind her had stopped rotating. A resident in the front row quietly muttered, "So we're not even allowed to walk there?" I answered without looking away from Karen. "No. You're not. That land is mine. Trespassing will be prosecuted." There was a long silence, broken only by the soft hum of the old projector fan. Karen tried to recover by shifting the conversation to community aesthetics, but no one followed her lead. The meeting was essentially over. I gathered my papers slowly, nodded to the stunned board, and left the way I came. Outside, under the dim parking lot lights, I saw a small group of residents talking quietly. One of them waved me over. Susan, the board member I remembered from earlier, held a concerned expression. "I had no idea," she said. She told us the land was abandoned county property. I shrugged. Now you know,